My name is Michelle Harding. I'm 49 years old, and for most of my adult life, I've been trusted with decisions that affected thousands of people. I grew up the daughter of a single mother, in a modest house not far from the coast, and I built my career one promotion at a time. Discipline, clarity, and accountability weren't just values I believed in. They were how I survived. How I led. How I earned every stripe and star along the way. But none of that prepared me for the moment I walked back into my mother's home and realized I was being sized up like a subordinate who'd stepped out of line. Before I tell you what happened next, let me ask you something. Have you ever been spoken down to by someone who assumed they had authority over you? Not because they earned it, but because they decided you were supposed to accept it. If that's ever happened to you, stay with me. This story isn't about rank. It's about what happens when someone mistakes control for leadership. I met him on a Thursday afternoon in late September. My mother's voice had been different on the phone for weeks beforehand. Lighter, almost girlish in a way I hadn't heard since I was a teenager. When I finally made it home between assignments, I understood why. He was standing in the living room when I walked in, shoulders squared, posture rigid, occupying the space like he'd been there for years instead of months. His name was Mark Ellison. An Air Force colonel, recently retired. He turned when he heard my footsteps, his eyes assessing me in a way I recognized instantly. Not curiosity. Evaluation. "Michelle," my mother said, smoothing her sweater nervously. "This is Mark." He stepped forward and extended his hand. His grip was firm, measured. "Your mother's told me a lot about you," he said. "You're Navy, right?" "Yes, sir." "What ship do you work on?" The assumption landed quietly but heavily. I'd spent nearly 3 decades climbing through the ranks, holding command billets most people never see, and he placed me somewhere around mid-career without hesitation. "I'm not currently assigned to a ship," I said evenly. "Oh," he replied, tilting his head. "So what do you actually do?" "I mean, day to day." My mother touched his arm lightly. "Mark, Michelle just got off a long flight. Let's sit down." Dinner that night told me more than any conversation could have. He dominated it effortlessly, stories flowing one after another about commands he'd held, inspections he'd survived, exercises he'd overseen overseas. When my mother tried to talk about her volunteer work at the VA hospital, he smiled politely and redirected the conversation back to himself. I watched the light drain from her face, replaced by something patient and careful. He noticed me watching and shifted his focus. "You should think about bringing someone home sometime," he said casually. "Career's important, but you don't want to wake up one day realizing you chose the wrong priorities." "I'm quite content with my life," I replied. "Sure," he said, waving a hand. "I'm just saying, women today are told they can have it all. Biology doesn't negotiate." My mother laughed, a little too quickly. "Mark's just old-fashioned," she said. "He means well." Old-fashioned. She'd used that word before, like a shield against something she didn't want to name. I excused myself early that night, claiming exhaustion. In my childhood bedroom, still decorated with old academy photos and a faded naval flag, I could hear their voices through the walls. "She's defensive," Mark said. "She's tired," my mother replied. "Michelle's always been independent." Well, independence can come across as disrespect. The next morning, I found him in the kitchen before sunrise. He gestured vaguely toward the coffee pot, as if granting permission. He moved through the space with deliberate noise, opening cabinets, setting dishes down harder than necessary. When I didn't react, he spoke again. "You're only here a couple days, right?" 3. I leave Sunday. Must be hard on your mother, he said. You being gone so much. The implication wasn't subtle. He was here. I was temporary. Territory had been claimed. Throughout the day, the moments added up. He corrected my mother's version of how they met. Rearranged furniture without asking. Referred to me as kid more than once. Each time, my mother tried to smooth it over. He's just particular, she said. He likes order. That afternoon, the tension finally surfaced. I'd left my travel bag near the stairs. Mark nearly tripped over it. In this house, he said sharply, we respect standards. I'll move it, I replied calmly. It's about discipline, he continued. Your mother and I have an understanding. My mother appeared, dish towel in hand. Mark, it's fine. She's only here a few days. That's not the point, he said, eyes fixed on me. Discipline doesn't take a vacation. Later, I found my mother alone in the kitchen, bracing herself against the counter. I'm sorry, she whispered. You don't need to apologize for me, I said. He's a good man, she insisted. He just has high standards. I'd heard that justification before. In briefing rooms. In exit interviews. High standards don't require intimidation. They don't require someone to feel small. That night, lying awake in the bed where I'd once studied for entrance exams, I thought about authority. About how some people confuse being obeyed with being respected. About how my mother, who raised me to stand tall, had started shrinking in her own home. Something was wrong. I didn't yet know how far it would go, but I knew this wasn't over. And what happened the next night would force all of us to stop pretending otherwise. The second night changed everything. The house was quiet by the time I sat down at the kitchen table around 10 p.m., tablet open, emails from my staff waiting for decisions that couldn't wait until Monday. My mother had gone to bed early, worn down from another evening of carefully steering conversation away from tension. The only sound was the soft hum of the refrigerator and the porch light glowing through the window, the same light that had been on since dusk. I was halfway through a message when I felt someone standing behind me. Mark was in the doorway, civilian clothes this time, but the posture was the same. Rigid. Expectant. The porch light's still on, he said. Your mother keeps forgetting. I've told her about that. I can turn it off, I replied without looking up. He stepped past me and flipped the switch with unnecessary force, then paused, eyes narrowing as he took in the scene. You're in my seat. I looked up, genuinely confused. Excuse me? That's my seat, he repeated, nodding at the chair I was in. I sit there. I waited for the smile that would tell me this was a joke. It never came. I'm just finishing some work, I said. I'll be done in a few minutes. No, he said, his voice sharpening. You'll move now. The kitchen felt smaller suddenly, like the air itself had tightened. Mark, I said evenly, this is my mother's house. His face flushed. And I'm the man of this house. I give the orders here. That sentence landed harder than any raised voice. Not because it was loud, but because it was certain. He believed it. My mother appeared in the doorway, robe pulled tight around her, eyes wide with confusion. What's going on? Your daughter has a respect problem, he said. I asked her to move. I'm answering emails, I said quietly. That's all. After I told you to get up. Something settled in me then. Not anger. Clarity. I closed my tablet slowly and reached down to my travel case beside the table. I pulled out a small leather box and placed it between us. I didn't rush. I didn't say anything dramatic. I opened it. 2 silver stars caught the light. The room went completely still. Mark stared at them, his expression draining as recognition set in. Muscle memory took over before his pride could catch up. His shoulders snapped back. His hands dropped to his sides. He stood at attention, trembling slightly. "You don't outrank me," I said calmly. "You never did." My mother's hand flew to her mouth. "Michelle," she whispered. "I tried to tell you, Mark. I showed you the photos." I thought, his voice trailed off. "I didn't realize." "You didn't ask," I replied. "You decided." He swallowed hard, eyes fixed on the stars. "You should have made it clearer." "I did," I said. "You just didn't want to hear it." Silence stretched between us, heavy and uncomfortable. Finally, he broke attention, frustration bubbling up. "You can't pull rank here. This isn't the military." "You're right," I said. "If it were, you'd already be relieved for this behavior." That's when my mother started crying. Quiet tears, the kind that come after holding too much in for too long. Mark turned to her, his tone shifting instantly. "Maggie, I'm sorry. This got out of hand. We can talk about this." "You need to leave," I said. He looked at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. "You can't order me out." "I'm not ordering you," I said. "I'm telling you what's happening. You're leaving tonight so my mother can think without being intimidated." He turned to her, disbelief written across his face. "Maggie?" She stared at the table, at the stars still resting in velvet. "Maybe that's best," she said softly. "Just for tonight." He packed with sharp, efficient movements. A door slammed upstairs. Footsteps. Then the front door closed, not quite a slam, but close enough. The house exhaled. We sat there in silence. Finally, my mother reached out and touched the edge of the case. "2 stars," she whispered. "When did this happen?" 18 months ago, I said. "I tried to tell you. We just kept missing each other." She nodded, tears falling freely now. "I'm so proud of you." "I know," I said. "But this isn't about that." Later, as dawn crept in, she admitted what she'd been minimizing for months. The comments. The corrections. The raised voice. The way she'd started second-guessing herself in her own home. "I thought he was stable," she said. "I was lonely. I didn't want to be alone anymore." "You don't have to earn peace," I told her. "Not in your own house." Morning came too fast. Mark showed up again, this time in uniform, as if rank could save him. He apologized without naming what he'd done. He blamed stress. He blamed misunderstanding. When my mother finally said she needed space, he called it an overreaction. When she asked him to move out, he said I'd poisoned her against him. "I'm finally reacting the right amount," she told him. He left again, this time for good. By the time I flew out 2 days later, the house felt different. Lighter. My mother stood in the doorway watching me leave, not small, not uncertain. Just standing. What happened after that didn't involve shouting or confrontations. It involved boundaries. Phone calls unanswered. Locks changed. Silence that finally brought clarity. And that's when the real work began. The house felt different the morning after he left. Not quieter, exactly. Just lighter, like something heavy had finally been set down. My mother was already awake when I came into the kitchen, dressed and moving carefully, as if she didn't quite trust the calm yet. She poured coffee for both of us and sat down across the table where the stars had rested the night before. "He texted," she said. "Asking if we can talk. Said he thinks we can work through this rationally. Do you want to?" I asked. She thought for a moment. "No. I just keep thinking I should. Like I owe him that." "You don't owe anyone access to you," I said. "Especially not someone who made you feel small." She nodded, slowly. "I know. I'm just learning how to listen to that voice again." Later that afternoon, he showed up anyway. Not angry. Not loud. Calm. Controlled. The most dangerous version of someone who doesn't want to lose power. I met him at the door before he could knock. "I need to talk to Maggie," he said. "She doesn't want to see you," I replied. "That's not your decision." "No," I said. "But respecting hers is." He leaned in slightly, testing. "You don't have authority here." "You're right," I said. "But she does." He stood there for a long moment, then stepped back. "Tell her I came by." "I will." That was the last time he tried in person. Over the next few weeks, the silence stretched. My mother changed the locks. Updated her emergency contacts. Adjusted her volunteer schedule so she wouldn't run into him. Each small action felt monumental to her. She told me once it felt strange to make decisions without asking permission. That was the part that hurt the most. Not the yelling. Not the confrontation. The way she'd been trained to doubt herself. I went back to my command, back to the rhythm of briefings, readiness reports, and long days where thousands of sailors depended on my judgment. But I called my mother every night now. Not because she needed checking on, but because connection mattered more than efficiency. Slowly, her voice changed. Less careful. More certain. She took up watercolor painting. Then pottery. She laughed about being terrible at both and loving them anyway. She started hiking on weekends. She told me she sometimes felt lonely, but not the kind of lonely that makes you accept the wrong person. The kind that reminds you who you are when no one is telling you who to be. About a month later, he showed up at the VA hospital during her volunteer shift. Raised his voice. Refused to leave. Security escorted him out. That night, I made a phone call. Quiet. Professional. Not a complaint. Just a warning placed where it belonged. His contact stopped after that. Weeks passed. Then months. My mother started leading a support program for military families. A paid position. She sounded nervous when she told me, like she needed permission to be proud. "You're good at this," I said. "I know," she replied softly. "I forgot." By Thanksgiving, I flew home again. She picked me up at the airport, and I almost didn't recognize her. Not because she looked younger, but because she stood differently. Straighter. Like someone who remembered she owned her space. The house reflected it too. Bright paint. Rearranged furniture. Photos back on the walls. Evidence of a life reclaimed. Over dinner, she told me she'd run into him at the grocery store. Polite. Brief. Uneventful. "I felt nothing," she said. "Just relief." "That's closure," I replied. Later that night, she looked at an old photo from my promotion ceremony. I was already shrinking then, she said quietly. "I didn't even know it." "You're not anymore," I said. No, she agreed. I'm not. I left the next morning knowing she would be okay. Not because I'd intervened, but because she'd chosen herself. The stars I carry represent authority, yes. But the most important authority is the kind that doesn't shout. The kind that doesn't need someone else to be smaller to feel whole. Real leadership creates space. It protects dignity. It recognizes when control has crossed into harm. Mark thought authority meant giving orders. He was wrong. Authority without respect is just noise. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to stand up to someone who crossed a line in your own home, your family, or your life, I want to hear from you. Share your experience in the comments. You never know who might need to read it. If you believe boundaries matter more than titles, hit like. And if you want more real stories about power, family, and reclaiming your voice, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Some lessons are learned the hard way. Others are learned when someone finally says, enough.